or to visit with other congregations. And I'm sure the congregation where I attend agrees. It's nice to hear somebody else once in a while, and I'm sure it's nice for them to hear somebody else too. But I'm really glad to be here. I would love to say that's just the nature of being a preacher. You just can't take yourself too seriously. You know how it goes. So um, I would like to say that I'll be teaching us a lesson, and I hope that there's something that I'll offer you that you haven't thought before. But more than anything, I hope to lead us in our thoughts together as we think about what Abraham's going to do here. I found through the years there are maybe a handful of scriptures that you might want to identify as safe, but there are fewer and fewer of them anymore, meaning that you can read them and walk away and think, that's pretty easy for me to read, pretty easy for me to take, to just take into. But most of them these days, when I read them, I see a challenge to my soul. I see a challenge to the way that I think. And particularly when I'm reading from the Old Testament, because though it is the pedigree of my faith in a certain way, I also am a follower of Jesus, who in many occasions asks us to rethink some of the ways of doing things. So today we're going to be in Genesis 18. I'm going to read these 3 verses. I'm going to have them up here for you too, if you want to read them along with me. The first is going to be the entire section, so I'm going to read the entire one so I don't have to go through it word by word when we're there, so we'll have already read it. And then there's 2 others from the New Testament that I want to read as well. So I'll get this part out of the way as we begin. So the first one is in Genesis 18. Let me turn there in my Bible so I already have that too. All right. So then the men rose up from there. By the way, this is New American Standard Translation. It's just what I've used for years and years. Outside of that, I'm not really sure I have a reason for using that version. But the men rose up from there and looked down towards Sodom. And Abraham was walking with them to send them off. The Lord said, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? Since Abraham will surely become a great and mighty nation, and in him all the nations of the earth will be blessed. For I have chosen him, so that he may command his children," the word there is actually sons, "and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring upon Abraham what he has spoken about him." And the Lord said, "The outcry of Sodom and Gomorrah is indeed great, their sin is exceedingly grave. I will go down now and see if they have done entirely according to its outcry, which has come to me, and if not, I will know." Then the men turned away from there and went towards Sodom. While Abraham was standing before the Lord, Abraham came near and said, Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you indeed sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of the 50 righteous who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to slay the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous and the wicked are treated alike. Far be it from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth deal justly? So the Lord said, if I find in Sodom 50 righteous within the city, then I'll spare the whole place on their account. And Abraham replied, "Now behold, I have ventured to speak to the Lord, even though I am dust and ashes. Suppose the 50 righteous are lacking 5. Will you destroy the whole city because of 5? And he said, "I will not destroy it if I find 45. And I love his argument there. In other words, not for 45, but if I take 5 off, is that going to be that big a deal? Is his question. And so he spoke to him yet again and said, "Suppose 40 are found there." And he said, "I will not do it on account of the 40. Then he said, "Oh, may the Lord not be angry, and I shall speak. Suppose there are 30. And he said, "I will not do it if I find 30. And then he says, "Now behold, I have ventured to speak to the Lord. Suppose 20 are found there." And he said, "I will not destroy it on the account of the 20. And then he said, "Oh, may the Lord not be angry, and I shall speak only this once," or probably better translated, only one more time. "Suppose 10 are found there." And he said, "I will not destroy it on account of the 10. And as soon as he had finished speaking to Abraham, the Lord departed, and Abraham returned to his place. For while we are still helpless, at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. For one will hardly die for a righteous man, though perhaps for the good man someone would dare even to die. But God demonstrates his own love toward us, and that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Much more then, having now been justified by his blood, that is, we shall be saved from the wrath of God through him. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you only greet your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles, or meaning the world, do the same thing? For most of it, it seems like there's only this handful of passages that change the way that we approach a life and faith. And so, as I was telling Josh when I first came in, I had chosen Hagar, and somebody had already chosen that because there's an easy connection to the New Testament with Hagar, and Paul mentions her specifically. But somebody had already taken that, whoever that was, anathema. I'm just kidding. So this is the one I chose next because this is actually a more meaningful passage for me, particularly in my journey as a student of the Bible. Years ago, when exactly, I don't really remember, I began reading through the Old Testament in earnest. I wanted to have read the entire thing, and I wanted to see for myself what the Old Testament was like. And if you haven't done that, I would encourage you to do the same thing. And this is one of a handful of passages that struck me and really changed the way I saw prayer, the way I saw God, the way I saw a relationship with God. Because I had been told, and I had understood by what I had been told, that the God of the Old Testament was unapproachable and terrifying, that no one dare question him, no one dare come to him to say anything or to go against anything that he had to say. And then I read this, and that is clearly not the case. There are places where God is on the mountain and he's terrible and he's terrifying, and the people know, Moses, you go up and talk to him. We do not want anything to do with that. However, in this particular case, Abraham, maybe because God is being seen here as a man, as you can tell, and maybe that is a little easier for him to have this conversation. Nonetheless, he has this repartee with God. You know, they have a conversation, and God is willing to listen. But here I saw Abraham, and you can tell he's reluctant in it. Lord, I'm dust and ashes. Please don't be upset. But hey, how many people would it take for you to save it? And I won't say this much as we go on, but I should point out to you, I'll just ask it as a question, who stopped asking? You know, we stop at 10, but Abraham is the one who stopped asking. Maybe God was willing to even extend farther, but who knows? This is more than a prayer or a conversation. In fact, I would argue for us, it is more than a petition. It has come and gone. It has happened, and there's nothing we can do about that. It is an appeal to justice. An appeal to justice. Now, for most of us, justice rightly is a multifaceted term, right? Justice can mean retribution. I did this, and this is, to be paid back for that is justice. Justice can be an innocent person seeking justice, meaning I've been accused of something that I didn't do, so could you give me justice? And in that way, that's not retributive, but we would still call that justice. Sometimes justice is merciful, which is what we're going to see here. But Abraham is going to call God to justice. Will you really do this? Is it really the right thing to do, God, to wipe away however many few righteous people just because these wicked people deserve it? That is his question to God, in essence. And though we may not be speaking to God face to face these days, and perhaps God is still a bit hidden, we still come to him in hope of justice, do we not? We look at our world, in some ways very different, and in other ways very much the same as the world of Abraham. There are good, decent, righteous, whatever term you want to use, people, and then there is also a good deal of wickedness. And we may wonder in this world whether or not there is justice. The good, the decent, the righteous suffer. Sometimes, as David says, and it's said in other places in the Psalter and the Proverbs as well, sometimes the wicked, in spite of being wicked, prosper. Or when the wicked find their place among us, They pull all of us down, our entire society, into their mire. And we may wonder, where is justice? We may ask, why does a God of justice allow such things? I'm going to have a few answers for you today, as I've already said. This is more of just introducing us to this conversation here, and we will look to some places in the New Testament as well. But we are going to take our place in this discussion that has been going on for thousands and thousands of years. How do I trust that God is just when I look at the world around me and it seems so unjust? I will say this. Justice for us as believers and heirs of God's kingdom should find expression in us. Justice, that is, should find expression in us when we are able to do it. Right? So in other words, what I mean by that is, as believers, when we have an opportunity to demonstrate justice, in whatever definition that is, we have a place as people of God's kingdom to enact that. Okay? I cannot bring rain. In my position, I cannot, at least forcibly, stop someone from doing something wicked. I can ask them not to. But I'm a preacher. I can only encourage them. I'm not going to do anything. There's nothing I can do to stop someone. But I can be a just man. A man who is just and fair to my family, just and fair in my dealing with others, just and fair in my mercy, but also just and fair in other things that come about in my life. A man who is positioned alongside the gospel. So in other words, in the way that we talk about and administer justice, we are reflections of the gospel, and that is where I will lead us when we get close to the end. And what happens here is almost the opposite. I want to start with this of what happens with Elijah. You remember Elijah, and he gets upset. He feels like he's all alone. He's been mistreated. He says, "Lord, I'm the only one left. All the other prophets, everyone else has turned away, and look at what has happened to Israel. I'm the only one left." And God reminds him, as Paul also quotes in Romans, how many others were there, does he say, that were still, had not, quote, bow the knee to Baal? How many? 7,000, he says. 7,000. So he was not alone. So that's that end of the spectrum. He felt alone. Here, Abraham hopes. And Abraham thinks not that there are no righteous people in Sodom. He hoped there were. He didn't want to be alone. He didn't want the city to be destroyed. He wanted it to be saved. He hoped that there was enough righteousness to justify saving the city. He seems to agree that there is wickedness there. It must have been notorious for its wickedness, as it still is to this day. But he questions God's justice in destroying the city and asks him to recognize that the few righteous are worth the salvation of the entire city. And that is so backward to the way most of us think. And I'll mention this again in a moment. Because what we think is, if there's one bad apple, it's worth destroying all the innocent in the whole world. Abraham thinks just the opposite. This city is wicked, and the wicked people deserve what's coming to them. But Lord, is it just if there's even 10 good people in that city to wipe the whole thing out? And isn't it sad, here we are as Christians thinking the opposite of a man who came thousands and thousands of years ago. In fact, we might even call it pathetic, that we still have a misconstrued idea of what justice is. The interesting twist is that those with whom Abraham is likely most concerned, who do you think that would be? And we're told this, by the way, later on in the next chapter, Genesis 19. But why do you think Abraham's even bothering? You think he cares about Sodom? Generally, I mean, he might, but I don't think so as much as who lives there? Lot. There we go. This is where he becomes the intercessor. Lot and his family lived there. And I think part of this may be Abraham hopes that his family is at least righteous. And if he could count them all together, they wouldn't have matched 10. But nonetheless, he was hoping maybe there's a few other ones. And as we see very clearly in Genesis 19, not even all those were righteous either. But that's, I think, part of what he's doing here. But in this case, God tried to save them. Isn't that interesting? So even though there were not 10 there, God sends these two angels that were told they're angels in Genesis 19. and they attempt to save the family anyway. The two son-in-laws are like, oh, I think I'll hang around here. So the two daughters leave with Lot and his wife, and we are told even by Jesus to remember Lot's wife because she disobeyed and looked back and is turned into a pillar of salt. So really ended up only saving three. But I would argue these three are the ones that Abraham was really concerned about anyway. Now this particular section begins with God's inner dialogue. So if you wanted to turn to Genesis 18, you can, because I won't be going there necessarily. I'll be here in the Bible, obviously, but I won't have it up on the screen. And here's God's inner dialogue. He asked himself, shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? Because God is God, there's always going to be a certain hiddenness to what he does. Meaning, I'll actually talk about that more in a moment, so let's just wait. The gospel itself, though now it has been revealed, at one time was a mystery. And in fact, Paul calls the gospel a mystery dozens of times. Meaning it was something that was kind of hidden, but slowly over time, God revealed. But if he would have told us at the very beginning, hey, you're going to become so horrible that I'm going to have to sacrifice my son, we'd have told him, no, surely not. We would have tried to do whatever we could have to have thwarted his plan. And so I think that's part of the reason why. Last year, I read a book about the hiddenness of God. And I'm not going to talk about the book as much as what it got me to thinking about. In this case, God is not hiding. In this case, God is going to tell Abraham his intentions. He is bringing Abraham into this process, allowing him to think and rebut what God is about to do. So we'll read that little section there in this kind of inward dialogue, possibly with these other two angels or whatever. He says, verse 17, shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? Since Abraham will surely become a great and mighty nation, and in him all the nations of the earth will be blessed. For I have chosen him so that he may command his children or his sons and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness. And what's the next word there? Justice. So that the Lord may bring upon Abraham what he has spoken about him. Because we know what happens, we assume from the beginning that God is going to destroy the city. And Abraham seems to as well. But what he says is, I'm going to go find out if the outcry I've heard is for real. And so I think he sends these two as a delegation to see. It is terrifying, but it is also quite empowering for me to think that sometimes we are invited into the drama of history, as Abraham is here, of God's dealing with humanity. This could have been a test to see if Abraham understood justice. He says, in other words, the question God asks is, should I tell him what I'm going to do? Because I am making him the father of all these nations. And he's going to have to teach his sons about righteousness and justice. So let's see how he understands justice in this situation. And so for God, I think to hide it from Abraham is almost not trusting him with what he has said he's going to trust him with. And so he decides, of course, to let him in on what is happening, at least in part. When I read the text, it seems as though God feels obligated to tell Abraham because Abraham has already been entrusted with a great deal. And so why can I not trust him with this? Why can I not speak to Abraham and let him think through what's about to happen to this city if I find out they are as evil as I've heard? He was, quote, trusted in righteousness and justice with his sons and his house. Why not trust him with this? Why not see if Abraham understands justice on a larger scale? God then presumably speaking to everyone here, meaning Abraham and then these other two, because of what happens here. He says he would go down to see if Sodom for himself, to see how things were going, and then he doesn't relate his intentions of destroying the city just yet. Abraham asks the question, what I believe is a legitimate question to ask, particularly when someone is there that you love, like his relatives. And here is that question, the top one here. Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? If that is not underlined in your Bible, it should be after tonight. Because there is no way we have not thought something similar at some point in our life. A few weeks ago, though I don't think anyone of us considered this calamity punishment or something, down in Texas, there were hundreds of people who died because of flooding. Do we not think were there righteous people that were swept away at the same time? Does not our idea of justice come and say, why do these things happen? And so you see this, though Abraham is looking behind the veil, so to speak, we're still left to ask the similar questions. Lord, is this just? Is this right for the righteous and the wicked to have the same end? Again, this question we are still mulling over and struggling with. We see the wicked and the righteous swept away together, and something feels unjust about it. It doesn't seem right. But the righteous and the wicked often live and work in proximity of one another, though, do they not? I'll ask you to raise your hand. You're welcome. Go ahead. Has anybody ever worked with a person you would think was wicked? All right. Have you ever lived near somebody that you're like, yeah, they're wicked? All right. Very good. So it demonstrates to us that we're not in these isolated camps, that we're all kind of intermingling together. And so it makes punishing one over the other or having mercy for one over the other a very messy affair because we're all kind of in these things together. When calamity strikes, the wicked and righteous alike suffer in this calamity. We feel like one deserves it maybe, but the calamity of the other feels unjust. So Abraham begins to wonder and question, how many righteous people would it take to overlook the transgressions of the wicked? He doesn't say it like that, but that is what he's asking. Let's say there are hundreds of wicked people in Sodom, Lord. How many righteous people would it take for you to overlook destroying this city? I assume Abraham, as well as you, may have considered, oh, maybe they deserved it. But what about these righteous ones? Do they? Are they the ones that are supposed to also suffer because of what the wicked has done? So he asks, is 50 righteous enough to save this city? And then he continues with the second section I have up here. He says, far be it from me to do such a thing. Paul said, could you imagine telling God that? Far be it from you, Lord. It's not, in other words, that's not like you, Lord. You're better than this. You know that this is not just. He says, to slay the righteous with the wicked so that the righteous and the wicked are alike. The treated there just kind of put in that slice in italics. Far be it from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth deal justly? So he's calling, very much like Moses will do later. You're the judge of all the earth. Are you not going to do it justly? Are you not righteous in what you do? Can you imagine questioning the justice of God? I assume at some point, whether we have had the opportunity to question God directly in our prayers, I'm assuming that we probably have wondered about justice, about why the good are swept into the destruction of those who are evil. I suppose just as often, the wicked live in the prosperity brought about by the righteous. So notice we're only looking at one side of this coin, right? Why do the righteous have to suffer for the wicked? But the question may also be, why do the wicked get to prosper because I'm righteous? You see, so you can think of it in a different way. Well, we see it regularly. And we may wish it were not so. Now, granted, in all of this, we are all people of the New Testament. Are Christians in here? Just want to make sure we're believers, if you prefer that term. Okay? And that changes often. Not maybe how we see justice, though I would argue it was, and I'm going to argue today that it does. But it definitely changes the way we approach it. And I'll also hopefully define that in a moment. We are the people of the gospel, people of Jesus. And we have come to recognize that the rain falls on, and this is words of your Lord, the just and unjust alike. The sun shines on the righteous and the unrighteous alike. And I may be getting those two backwards. We also know that God's justice is one that is justice as we may understand it from a legal perspective, but is also a justice of mercy and impartiality, which we are told multiple times. We also know that we too must take our own wickedness into account as believers. We have to take into account when Paul quotes the Old Testament and tells us, there is none righteous, not even one. And so I may be more righteous than someone else, I may be more decent or good than someone else, but we also have to take into account what I have done. We have to take into account that other innocent people have been caught in the wake of my wickedness. That the things I have done have not only affected me, but that sometimes they affect someone else. That we, though maybe sometimes when we are innocent, have faced the repercussion of the wickedness of others. Raise your hand if that's ever happened to you. That your life has been affected by someone else's wickedness. And I guess for the sake of fairness and justice, I'll ask you to raise your hand if decisions you have ever made that were wicked has affected someone else. Very good. So that's where we are in the New Testament perspective. Such is life and justice. But Abraham is given a chance to speak into and define justice. If I were in this position, I would have shrunk away in fear, terror, and ignorance. I'm like, Lord, I am not the person to be talking to you about justice. So I'm glad that Abraham was brave enough to take a stand for justice and speak this way. And that's why I think this question is so heavy. Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? And we already saw, God replies, I haven't gotten there just yet. God replies, if I find 50 righteous within the city, I will spare the city on their account. Abraham is not satisfied with that, and we looked already, 45, 40, 30, 20, 10. Now, I presume you know what happens. Everybody know what happens to Sodom and Gomorrah? If you don't, you're way behind the rest of humanity. All right, Christian or not, people know what happened in Sodom and Gomorrah. They are a byword, meaning we hiss at them because they were completely destroyed because of what they had done. And then when the two angels come, they try to mistreat them as well. And so it was a mess. But anyway, but what do we learn from this incident? What do we learn from Abraham's intercession? And what do we learn from what happens? First, I want to say that this interchange and another interchange between God and Moses in Exodus 32 changed my perspective on the way that I am able to approach God. I live with, coming up, I was never taught this really. It was just kind of the nature of the water you drink kind of thing, or the air you breathe in the communities I grew up in. You came to God to thank Him for things, and you came to God to say these same things week after week after week. And you may have had a conversation with God, but you never really had a chance to, I'm trying to think of the right word here, it doesn't sound sacrilege, but to challenge, to have a conversation, to wrestle. Raise your hand if you've ever read the Psalter, meaning the Psalms. All right? Is that just nice and easy language that you can just breeze right through? No. They're struggling with depression, they're struggling with anger, they're struggling with immense happiness and things like that. So these conversations with God, so to speak, are very raw and real. Exodus 32 is similar to here where God says, we can only take the words, the Bible's words for it. God says, that's it. I'm wiping them out. I'm going to start over with you, meaning Moses. So we can say, oh, maybe he was testing them, maybe. But he says outright that's what he was going to do. And what changes his mind? Or who should I say changes his mind? Moses. He says, Lord, what are they going to say? So he has this opportunity to have this conversation with God. Lord, they're going to say you brought us out here just to kill us. Do it for your name, if nothing else. And then the direct quote of Exodus 32 is, and the Lord listened to the words of Moses and changed his mind. Incredible that we're asked to have this conversation. Sometimes God allows us to be these active participants. Make sure I have what I want here. He tests us sometimes. He listens to us. He remembers us. Because that's what you're going to see later in Genesis. It says he remembers Abraham when he saves Lot. That's in Genesis 19:29. God remembered Abraham, and so he saves Lot. Abraham was not a perfect man, but he was trusted with a great deal, and he was given this opportunity of knowing God's intentions ahead of time. He was allowed into the mystery. Though reverent, could you agree that he was reverent and kind with God here? Very careful. I'm dust and ashes, please don't be angry. So he was very reverent, but he did not shrink away from advocating for this justice. And I believe not that God was going to do the thing. He knows God. He knew who God was. And he says, you are a God of justice. Surely this can't be, what you would do. It seems to be the way he was thinking. We often think, again, the opposite, that whatever must be done to the wicked, whatever suffering an innocent person may have to endure is worth the price to punish evil. But it should become clear enough, if you've read the New Testament at all, that this is not the way of the kingdom. The way of the kingdom is more similar to what Abraham is asking. I know the wicked deserve to be punished, but what about the righteous? There are fewer of them, I know, he says. But are they not worth it? Jesus tells a parable about the kingdom in Matthew 13, verses 24 to 30. And in this, an enemy sows tares among the wheat, is the way it goes. And they're kind of confused as to what happened. What would we do? Oh, you got to get those tares out real quick. By the way, tares are basically weeds that look like wheat until they come to maturity. So, oh no, we got to take these tares out. We got to get rid of them right now. But the wise manager says, no, wait just a minute. We'll wait till we'll let it all come up together, and then when it's over, when everything's mature and we can tell what's what, we will separate them when we glean. So when we're talking about God's justice, this is what comes up over and over in the New Testament. We must be patient. We are told not to repay evil with evil, but to overcome evil with good, by Paul. He quotes the Old Testament by saying, vengeance is mine, I will repay. It's God's job. And sometimes he's slow. I'm glad he's slow, and I'm going to tell you why in just a moment. To God, 1 of 99 is worth the effort. Or actually 1 of 100 with the other 99 doing their thing. To God, 1 of 10 coins is worth it. 1 of 2 sons is worth it. If punishment is our only and primary concern, what becomes of the innocent? In some ways, this incident is a reflection of the gospel, and this is where I'm going with this. Justice for many means only retribution and punishment. And certainly, in some cases, it means that. And when it's all said and done, I have to trust that God knows what he's doing. And that the wicked people that I look at and hope something bad happens to them, if God decides something different, I have to be okay with that, as tough as that may be. And yet, in Abraham's mind, in this case at least, justice meant mercy on some level. It meant that the innocence of the innocent should outweigh the wickedness of the evil. It means some guilty go unpunished for the sake of sparing those who are innocent, at least for a time. Surely, reasons Abraham, the wicked and the righteous should not meet the same end. Sometimes, unfortunately, by just what we've witnessed in life, they do. Just as the wicked sometimes prosper alongside the righteous, you cannot have one without the other. The gospel takes this one step further. Not only did the death of the righteous Jesus atone for the decent people, what are we told by what I read at the beginning Jesus did. For a good man, someone might die. But even though we were sinners, wicked, Christ died for us. We ought to be grateful in some cases for the delay of justice. So from our perspective, we're looking at this wickedness that Paul calls flesh that can be within us in some degree or of another. From our perspective, when we borrow from Paul, he quotes, "None is righteous, not even one." So the question becomes what I have written up here. Not will God punish the wicked as well as the righteous, but will God or can God save the wicked as well as the righteous? This is why Jonah was so mad. Nineveh was full of wicked people. And what do you do to wicked people, Lord? You wipe them off the face of the planet. And yet what does God decide to do here? Jonah goes and preaches, gives them an opportunity. They repent, and he's mad about it. And he kind of seems petulant, like a child in some cases, there toward the end of that book. We are often more appalled by that question, and it challenges our notions of justice. You mean the wicked can be saved as well as I can? You mean the adulteress can walk free without anyone stoning her? You mean the fraudulent tax collector can become a child of Abraham and make things right? You mean the deceiver can be offered the truth? You mean the sinner has someone to lay down his life for him? Yeah, that's the gospel. And God is just to do so. As Paul reminds us again in Titus 3:3, I think I have this up here. He says, submit to this, submit to that, treat others with respect because we were once foolish ourselves. We were once ignorant ourselves. We once didn't know. In other words, we were once part of the wicked. What we learn from Abraham finds fulfillment in the gospel. A just God is a God of mercy and a God of judgment. We have our place, we have our notions, we have our opportunity to make our case. But ultimately, we have to trust that God knows what is best. Do you trust that He knows what is best? If something unjust happens in my life, and it has, I go to God, and I'm very direct with Him, and I do it in a way that I hope is reverent as to what I want to happen, what I'd love to see happen. But ultimately, I have to decide, Lord, you know what is best. This city, despite God listening to Abraham, was destroyed, and it wasn't because God didn't give him a chance. Lot and his daughters were saved, only to sin even more greatly, or as greatly at least, right afterwards, if you know that story as well. Like Abraham, I do not want my life or the life I love, those I love, to be wiped away because of someone else's wickedness. It terrifies me that my children might die because of a wicked person, or that their lives would be worse because of a wicked person. I will ask God to intervene if something like that comes up. But I must tell you, I am a man. To quote Abraham, I am dust and ashes. I cannot see all there is to see today, much less what has been and what will be tomorrow. I want to leave two things with you. One I'm going to quote in my prayer I'm going to give you in just a moment. And that is, you remember when Jesus gives Peter and the disciples a heads up about what's going to happen? I'm going to go to the chief priests and elders. They're going to kill me, and I'm going to raise on the third day. And Peter says, let your will be done, Lord. What does he say? No, that can't be. And Jesus calls him my adversary, Satan. I feel like a lot of the times God doesn't let us know what's going to happen because we would stand in the way of God's interest. And then the second thing I want to point out is this. The Saul who imprisoned and killed someone's son or daughter is the Paul who would embrace the gospel and become the apostle to the Gentiles. He was shown a great deal of mercy, and he knew that. So I'll just ask this question again before I close with a prayer that I've already written down. Will you indeed wipe away the righteous with the wicked. If you would pray with me. Lord, we trust you. I am grateful that you hide what you do from me, because I don't want to be like Peter, who might stand in your way as an adversary. Lord, I will probably lament to you. My spirit will cry out. I may wonder where you are. I may wonder what you are doing. I will beg. I will offer my gratitude. I will ask for mercy. And I will also ask for judgment. Please fill me with enough of your Spirit to trust you, whatever it is that may come. Thank you, Lord, for not sweeping me away in my wickedness and ignorance. Thank you for saving me because of the righteousness of someone else and the righteousness of your Son. Thank you for the gospel, for imprisoning me in sin and then forgiving me so that I can understand mercy and justice. It's in your Son's name I pray. Amen. Thank you very much.